Okay, we're back with Thomas Taylor's dissertation on Aristotle. This chapter is on the perpetuity of natural motion, the argument basically for the eternity of the world. And we left off right here. I'm going to back up a little bit and just kind of get into it. So, hence, when they approach near, the one moves. That's not a good spot. Such things, however, as are able to act and suffer, or to move and to be moved, are not entirely able to effect this, but then only when they subsist in this manner and are near to each other. Hence, when they approach near, the one moves and the other is moved, and when they are so circumstanced that the one is motive and the other movable. If, therefore, it was not always moved, it is evident that they were not so affected as that the one could be moved and the other could move. But it was necessary that one of them should be changed, for it is necessary that this should happen in things which have a relative subsistence. Thus, if a thing not having been double is now double, if not both, at least one of them must have been changed. There will, therefore, be a certain mutation prior to the first. To which may be added, how will there be prior and posterior time not having a subsistence, or how will there be time motion not existing? But if time is the number of motion, or a certain motion, if time always is, it is necessary that motion also should be perpetual. Concerning time, however, all philosophers except one appear to accord, for they say that it is unbegotten. On this account, Democritus shows that it is impossible for all things to have been generated, because time is unbegotten. But Plato alone generates time, for he says that it was generated together with the universe, and that the universe is generated. Of course, to interpret that, this is Aristotle kind of being uncharitable with Plato. The sense of generation we've already gone over several times. For Aristotle, always means the strict sense of something that comes into being and goes out of being. Plato calls things like time generated because they're of the nature of the world of generation, whether they have perpetuity or not. So moving on from here. If, therefore, it is impossible for time to be and to be conceived without the now, but the now is a certain middle, possessing at the same time the beginning and the end, the beginning indeed of the future time and the end of the past, it is necessary that time should always be. For the extremity of the last time, which is assumed, will be in some now, since nothing can be assumed in time besides the now. So that since the now is both a beginning and an end, it is necessary that time should always be on each side of the now. Well, that's an elegant argument for perpetuity. Yeah, the present moment is the only thing that time is ever presently composed of. It's the only part of time, nows. And nows are always the beginning of future time and the end of past time. So future time and past time have to exist relative to every now, if that definition of a now remains constant. So therefore, there's always a before and after relative to every now, and so there's no first or last moment of time. But if time, it is evident that motion also must necessarily always exist, since time is a certain passion of motion. He hasn't used that phrase for it before. Passion of motion. Of course, I don't know if I'm going to remember the previous definition. It was like the number of motion. Well, it's a number of motion in some sense. I forget the specific definition. Here he's calling it a certain passion of motion. So let's look at the footnote. And this is probably Simplicius. The demonstration of what is now said by Aristotle is as follows. Time is and is conceived according to the now. For of time, the now alone has a subsistence, because the past no longer is, and the future is not yet. But time which subsists according to the now subsists according to a medium which is in the beginning of the future time and the end of the past, and that which subsists according to such a medium as that there is always something prior and posterior to that which is assumed, is a thing of this kind. For that which may be hypothetically adduced as the last now is itself a middle, and has time posterior to itself, so that there is neither a last now nor a last time. For if there is a last time, there is also a last now, if the now is the boundary of time, just as a point is of a line. In a similar manner, neither has time a beginning, for the now, which appears to be in the beginning, is itself also a middle, since as it is the beginning of the future, so it is the end of the past. Time, therefore, is perpetual, neither having a beginning nor an end. But if time always is, motion also will evidently be perpetual, since time is the number or passion of motion. And as it is not possible to assume motion without time, so neither time without motion. Such then is the exposition of the interpreters of Aristotle of what is here said by him intellectually and divinely, in order to demonstrate that motion is perpetual. Okay, so yeah. Again, a neat argument for perpetuity. The same reasoning likewise will prove that motion is incorruptible. For as, if it be admitted that motion was generated, it will happen that there was a certain mutation prior to the first, so here it will happen that there is a mutation posterior to the last. For a thing will not at the same time cease to be movable and to be moved, or to be capable of being burnt and to be burnt. For that may be capable of being burnt, which is not burnt, nor to be motive and to move. But it will be requisite that what is capable of being corrupted should have been corrupted when it is corrupted, and again afterwards, that which has the power of corrupting this. For corruption is a certain mutation. If, therefore, these things are impossible, it is evident that motion is perpetual and not sometimes in existence and sometimes not. So that argument was harder to follow, and we'll just go to Simplicius. Hopefully he clarifies it. Footnote 5. Aristotle, having proposed to show that motion was not once generated, nor having a prior existence, nor can be corrupted so as not to exist afterwards, uses two arguments. One from the definition of motion, and the other from that of time, exhibiting from this the object of investigation in a twofold respect, viz. From the prior and posterior, and from the now, which always exists in the middle of the past and the future. In both arguments, however, from time, he demonstrates both these, viz. That time was not when motion was not, and that time will not be when there is no longer any motion. But in the argument derived from definition, having demonstrated that motion is unbegotten, and that time was not when motion was not, passing on to the argument derived from time, he now adds what is wanting to the argument from definition, viz. That motion is incorruptible. So he was just connecting, he argued about time, and now he's extending that argument about the perpetuity of time to motion, which he did briefly in the last argument, and now he's elaborating it. For as in the former arguments he demonstrated that motion is without generation, in consequence of that which is capable of being moved always subsisting prior to motion, so here he demonstrates it to be incorruptible through that which is capable of being moved always subsisting together with motion. For this is the meaning of the words, a thing will not at the same time cease to be movable and to be moved, nor to be motive and to move. For if a thing should cease to move or to be moved, and should be immediately corrupted, the capability of being moved will not remain after the motion. If a thing should cease to move or to be moved and should be immediately corrupted, the capability of being moved will not remain after the motion. Sure, okay. But if when not capable of being moved, it is capable of being at rest, because nature is the principle of rest as well as of motion. If anything ceases to be moved, it will not then also cease to be movable when motion is assumed as that which is properly motion and not as the corruption of that which may be moved. If, therefore, when ceasing to be moved, it remains movable, it may evidently be again moved, and that will not be the last motion with which it ceased to be moved. Okay, so the cessation of motion does not mean the cessation of the capacity of motion, just like he argued that the first motion was preceded necessarily by something which was capable of being moved. When the first thing is moved, it's not just spontaneously. That motion is the first moment of time, because for something to be moved, it had to already have that capacity of being moved. This is Aristotle's point. And then on the flip side, the hypothetically last motion doesn't immediately eliminate the capacity of motion of that object. Instead, things move between contraries, and what was actively motive now becomes actively passive, so to speak, but still potentially movable. So that motion from motion to rest leaves time because of the potential for future motion involved in the notion of rest, and that's what motion actually terminates in. And it would be a separate change, which was the corruption of its ability to be moved in the first place. But then if you say that the thing capable of being moved is corrupted, that corruption is a mutation or a change. And so the same argument then applies. That thing, the background, this is extending off of Aristotle's argument, but you could say that if the space in which movable object A is corrupted is like space A then has a mutation, the corruption of object A, which itself moves from that active corruption to another kind of state of rest. So you can kind of reiterate the argument. And if that space A is corrupted, there's a metaspace in which the motion of corruption is taking place. And you can, again, just apply Aristotle's argument wherever you want in that chain. Hopefully that's clear. I think it's a valid extension. Okay, so going on with Aristotle. For thus to speak rather resembles a fiction than anything else about the end. So the previous sentence, if therefore these things are impossible, it is evident that motion is perpetual and not sometimes in existence and sometimes not. For thus to speak resembles a fiction more than anything else. And the footnote, probably Simplicius. Aristotle, having demonstrated that motion is perpetual through the perpetuity of time, and that it is impossible to suppose motion or time to be generable or corruptible, now says that from this also, motion and time are shown to be perpetual, since to assert that motion or time once were and once were not, rather resembles a fiction than anything else. For what can be more fictitious than to say that neither motion nor time formerly existing were once generated, since why they were then generated, and not before or afterwards, is more similar to a fiction. It may also perhaps be said to be fictitious to assert that there was time when there was no time, but he who says that once there was time and once there was no time says this. Yes, there in the past there was no time is obviously absurd. The same fiction also takes place in motion, since time is the number of motion. For if time was when motion was not, but when motion is not, neither is there time, he who says this evidently says nothing else than there was time when there was no time. Aristotle. Let's read that sentence again. So, for thus to speak rather resembles a fiction than anything else, as also to assert that it is thus naturally adapted, and that it is necessary to consider this as a principle, which Empedocles appears to have asserted, who says that it is necessarily inherent in things that friendship and strife should alternately govern and move, and that they should be at rest in the intermediate time. Perhaps also those who make one principle as Anaxagoras would assert the same thing. Nothing, however, among those things which consist from and according to nature is deprived of order, for nature is to all things the cause of order. But the infinite has no ratio to the But the infinite has no ratio to the infinite, and all order is ratio. So he's, I think, giving an argument against the perpetuity of time by saying it can't be infinite because then it couldn't have some proportion and order. And presumably he responds to this. Let's see. That anything, however, should have been at rest for an infinite time, and afterwards should have been once moved, and that with respect to this there should be no difference, why it happened now rather than before and again, that it should have no order, this is no longer the work of nature. Oh, I see. So to have an infinite past time and then spontaneously some motion is inexplicable. The precise ratio, because there's no ratio of infinities, can't be established. So instead, finite durations of rest and motion have to alternate. So this wasn't a counterexample or a counter argument that he's going to refute. Instead, this is part of his argument. There aren't ratios between infinites, and therefore there wasn't some infinite time where the universe was waiting in a state of disorder to then bring order about, which was Anaxagoras' view as reported by Aristotle earlier. Okay, so for that which subsists by nature, either subsists simply and not differently at different times, as fire is naturally carried upwards, and not at one time and at another not, or it has a ratio which is not simple. Okay, so simple or a complex ratio. What he means by the complex ratio, I guess we'll see, and this is a longer footnote. So Simplicius. Aristotle, having said that to assert that motion at one time was, and at another was not, resembles a fiction, because the cause of this cannot be assigned. Afterwards says that to assert this is naturally adapted to be so, and to assign this as a principle and cause is similarly fictitious. This, however, Empedocles appears to assert when he says it is necessarily inherent in things that friendship and strife should alternately govern, and if this be the case, they should be at rest in the intermediate time. For rest is between contrary motions. But Eudemus considers immobility as subsisting in the dominion of friendship according to the sphere. For when all things were mingled together, Empedocles says, quote, then nor the sun's swift members splendid shone, but in dense harmony established lay, concealed, eternity's revolving sphere, rejoicing round its center firm to roll. But strife again beginning to have dominion, then again motion was produced in the sphere. Then all the members of the god appeared. What difference is there, however, between asserting that this was naturally adapted to be the case and saying that it was from necessity without adding the cause? Okay, yeah, so this is a criticism of Empedocles from Simplicius, I guess. So it seems like Aristotle's criticism of Empedocles here was that it seemed that motion sometimes happens and sometimes doesn't, but time is the measure of motion generally, and so there can't be a time with no motion. So therefore motion is perpetual. But if we define rest as a kind of passive motion or potential for motion, then you can still have time measuring it. So that could be Aristotle's way of getting out of this. Simplicius now is, I guess, piling on to Empedocles, or he's going to interpret how Empedocles, like, esoterically had a doctrine already that accounted for this. But here he's saying, What difference is there between asserting that something is naturally adapted to be the case and saying that it's from necessity but not giving the cause? So I guess this is an insufficient explanation to say something just naturally is that way, but not saying why it's necessary. But these things Empedocles appears to assert when he says, by turns they govern in revolving time. He also asserts that necessity is the cause of generated natures, of God's necessities the ancient seal, forever stamped with oaths of various forms. For through necessity and these oaths, he says, strife and friendship alternately have dominion. But Empedocles speaks of the dominion of strife as follows. When mighty strife was in the members hid, it to the honors rose of perfect time, and oaths in mutual turns for them remained. To assert these things without assigning a cause is nothing else, says Aristotle, than to say that it is naturally adapted to be so. Perhaps, too, says he, Anaxagoras asserts intellect to be a similar principle of motion, the prior homeomera being at rest, and not adding the cause through which intellect then moved, though in nature, and things produced by nature, the causeless and the disordered are especially to be avoided. Right, so these sorts of explanations are not fit for natural science. Anaxagoras has an infinite time and then creation of order, and there's no proper ratio against infinite time, and thus no reason. Ratio, logos, and reason, logos, same Greek word. So there's no reason why things should begin when they do. And then Empedocles, in saying that it just naturally is the case that it goes from rest to motion, rest, motion, love, strife, love, strife. That's not fit for natural science because nature is all about causes. And Empedocles leaves the cause of this necessary state of things unspoken. Okay, hence it is better to say with Empedocles and any other who may assert the same thing that the universe is alternately at rest and in motion. Okay, I kind of lost the thread here. We're going to back up a little bit. That anything, however, should have been at rest for an infinite time and afterwards should have been once moved, and that with respect to this there should be no difference, why it happened now rather than before, and again, that it should have no order, this is no longer the work of nature. For that which subsists by nature either subsists simply and not differently at different times, as fire is naturally carried upwards, and not at one time and another not, or it has a ratio which is not simple. Okay, so it's better to say with Empedocles that it alternates than to say that there's infinite past time of rest and then, I guess, infinite future time of motion. So it's better to go with Empedocles, but I don't think Aristotle's actually siding with Empedocles per se. And any other who may assert the same thing, that the universe is alternately at rest and in motion. For now a thing of this kind possesses a certain order. He, however, who asserts this, ought also to assign the cause of what he says, and not adopt any axiom without a reason, nor expect that it should be granted him, but he should either employ induction or demonstration, for the things which Empedocles supposes are not causes. So Empedocles is being unscientific, which, true, fair enough. Nor is this the essence of friendship or strife, but it is the province of the former to conjoin, and of the latter to separate. If also it is added that they have dominion alternately, it should be shown in what particulars this happens. As, for instance, because there is something which unites men, viz. Friendship, and enemies avoid each other. But this is also supposed to be in the universe because it thus appears to be in certain things. His assertion, likewise, that this happens in equal times requires a certain reason, and in short, to think that this is a sufficient principle, viz., that it either always is or is always generated, this is not right. To which Democritus refers natural causes, because they were thus, and prior to this, generated. but he does not think that the principle of eternity should be investigated, in some things speaking rightly, but because he asserts this of all things, not rightly. For a triangle has always angles equal to 2 right, but at the same time there is a certain other cause of this perpetuity. Of principles, however, there is no other cause, since they are eternal. Okay. Well, I was tracking it until like the last 3 sentences. Hopefully Simplicius clears it up a little bit. Simplicius. Aristotle says it is not right to assume as an indemonstrable principle that a thing is always and everywhere. For many things are indeed perpetual, and are so everywhere, yet they are not principles and things indemonstrable. But such things have certain causes and principles of their being. Thus, in mathematics, that the 3 inward angles of a triangle are equal to 2 right is indeed a thing perpetual, and this is the case in every triangle, yet it is not on this account an indemonstrable principle, but there is a certain principle of this, from which it is demonstrated. In like manner, that summer and winter alternately succeed each other is a thing perpetual, and is so everywhere, yet it is not a principle, but there are principles and causes of a motion of this kind. Hence, Aristotle does not admit Democritus referring natural causes to this principle, because they were formerly thus produced, and no longer thinking fit to investigate the principle and cause of things which are always generated in a similar manner, nor perceiving that in things in which the perpetual is a self-credible and indemonstrable principle, in these it is right not to investigate the cause of their always subsisting in this manner. So Empedocles didn't give a reason, so Anaxagoras couldn't give a reason, because there's no proper ratio to account for the transition that he puts forward. Empedocles couldn't give a reason for the alternation, and Democritus, with his idea that atoms just infinitely exist, and also there are infinitely many worlds in which these random atoms are just subsisting, that's not a first principle, that matter is indestructible. You could prove that from prior principles, but that kind of thing isn't an indemonstrable first principle. So it shouldn't be used that way. In these, it is right not to investigate the cause of their always subsisting in this manner, but that in things in which the perpetual is not a principle, in these principles and causes must be assigned. For not everything perpetual is a principle, though principle is entirely perpetual. So genuinely principles will always be the case, but not everything that is always the case is a principle. Since the perpetual is more extended than principle. More things are perpetual than are genuine principles. Hence, a geometrician being asked to demonstrate that the 3 inward angles of a triangle are equal to 2 right is not satisfied with saying that this is a perpetual thing, a principle, and indemonstrable, but he adds the demonstration. Democritus, therefore, must not think it is a sufficient cause of the congress and connection of the atoms that things generated were always thus generated. Right. So that's how it always has been. That doesn't make it a principle. It still requires explanation. Democritus doesn't give that explanation, according to Aristotle. It has, however, been frequently observed that Empedocles and Anaxagoras assert that the intelligible world is united and the sensible world separated. But both these worlds, having a perpetual subsistence, they assumed mutation according to time, for the purpose of indicating the order of these worlds and of the generation of the sensible from the intelligible world. Empedocles also signified by this the conversion of the sensible to the intelligible universe. So at the very end here, Simplicius does defend Anaxagoras and Empedocles, as he has previously, against Aristotle's seeming attacks on them by saying, well, the true doctrines of Anaxagoras and Empedocles weren't these surface-level interpretations that Aristotle's going through. Instead, they were symbolically unfolding, really, the true Platonic doctrine of the intelligible versus sensible world. which of course Simplicius doesn't think originated with Plato. This is a perennial ancient Greek philosophy, which maybe. Okay. That there neither was, therefore, nor will be a time when motion was not, or will not be, has been thus far shown. Okay, so his argument, he did earlier, and then he goes through how these other people don't have good arguments, even if they do believe that time is perpetual. And you'll notice Simplicius does not defend Democritus. Democritus is one of the few ancient Greek philosophers that Simplicius doesn't try to interpret into the fold of, I guess, Proto-Platonism. Okay. We're finally on book 2. So, interesting. I would like to hear more from Thomas Taylor himself. That would be great. Instead of just Aristotle, Simplicius, Aristotle, Simplicius. But, all right, book 2, chapter 1. Thomas Taylor here, having therefore presented the reader with an ample account of the principal dogmas of Aristotle's philosophy contained in his Physics, I shall in the next place direct his attention to the most important of the doctrines contained in his treatise on the heavens. The first of these doctrines, then, is this, that a celestial body is perpetual, and in order to demonstrate this, he previously evinces that it is different from the 4 elements. This he shows from the multitude of natural motions. For if natural things are natural from having nature, but nature is a principle of motion, the demonstration from natural motion is at the same time from things more evident as being from energies, and at the same time is from things more peculiar as being from causes. Okay, he's being even less clear than Aristotle somehow right now. This he shows from the multitude of natural motions, for if natural things are natural from having nature, but nature is a principle of motion, the demonstration from natural motion of the perpetuity of the celestial bodies, this demonstration from natural motion is at the same time from things more evident as being from activities, motions that we can observe, and at the same time is from things more peculiar as being from causes. Okay, so we have to look at the principle of motion and nature, which is more occult, and also the activities, which are more transparent to us. But in order to the demonstration from motions, But in order to the demonstration from motions, he preassumes 6 things, viz., that there are 2 simple motions, that which is in a circle and that which is in a right line, that a simple motion is the motion of a simple body, that of a simple body, the motion is simple, that there is one natural motion of one thing, that one motion is contrary to one, and that the heavens are circularly moved. These hypotheses also are mentioned by Plotinus in his treatise On the World. For being desirous to show, according to Plato, the perpetuity of the heavens, he says, the demonstration of this will be attended with no labor to Aristotle. If this hypothesis about a fifth body, if his hypotheses about a fifth body are admitted, meaning the above mentioned. For these being admitted, the perpetuity of the heavenly bodies necessarily follows. Okay, so once again, the 6 things, 6 presuppositions or premises. There are 2 simple motions, the circular, and the straight. And then a simple motion is the motion of a simple body. Interesting. And then that of a simple body, the motion is simple. Okay, so simple motion accords with a simple body. And then the contrary, a simple body has a simple motion. And then there is one natural motion of one thing. Okay. That one motion is contrary to one. And then 6, that the heavens are circularly moved. Okay. And next paragraph. It is requisite to observe, however, that by simple bodies, Aristotle means those which contain a principle of motion according to nature. So, by simple bodies, he means bodies which have one natural motive principle. So then his idea that simple bodies entail simple motions is kind of tautological, according to his definition of simple bodies. For animals and plants have also a principle of motion, yet not according to nature, but according to soul, and hence they are differently moved at different times. Yeah, so the nature of an inanimate body is a principle of motion, but it's a simple motion, whereas soul is the principle of motion for animate bodies, but their motion is complex. For composite bodies do not remain in the possession of similar parts, but also receive organic parts, as having a soul which uses the body as an instrument. But nature is the principle of the motion of a simple body, and hence bodies which alone possess nature have alone a simple motion. The following argument employed by him to show that the heaven... So that's kind of an interesting concept. We should bear that in mind. So souls are principles of motion, but so are natures, and a simple motive nature corresponds to a simple body. So he's, by the simple bodies, he's basically talking about the elements. You know, each element has a simple motion that it naturally goes through. Fire naturally rises, earth naturally sinks. The following argument, employed by him to show that the heavenly bodies are not moved by violence, appears to me to possess an invincible strength. If a celestial body is moved by violence, it is not moved naturally. And if it is not moved naturally, it is moved contrary to nature. But the motion which is contrary to nature is posterior to that which is according to nature, for that which is contrary implies the prior existence of that which is according to nature. The body, therefore, which is moved, which is just, I suppose, true, to say that something moves contrary to nature, you're presupposing the nature of that thing. The body, therefore, which is moved with a violent motion, has some natural motion prior to this, because violent motion is defined as a violation of the natural motion. Hence, if the heavenly bodies have always been moved by violence, they have always been moved contrary to nature, at the same time possessing a natural motion which has never been exerted, but perpetually counteracted. God and nature, however, do nothing in vain. Right, so God wouldn't implant a natural motive principle of the heavenly bodies, but never allow it to be exercised, because that would be in vain. This dogma is so very important and so completely subverts the present system of astronomy that I thought it necessary to premise thus much concerning it in order to awaken the attention of the reader to the following more ample discussion of it by Aristotle and his excellent commentator Simplicius. Yeah, no kidding. Okay. I didn't realize Thomas Taylor was like so lazy. I mean, he's a good translator. That's work that he's doing, to be fair. But it's like, dude, you can't just have most of your book be quotations. That I thought it necessary to premise thus much concerning it in order to awaken the attention of the reader to the following more ample discussion of it by Aristotle and his excellent commentator Simplicius. Aristotle, therefore, begins his treatise on the heavens as follows, quote, "The science concerning nature nearly appears to be, for the most part, conversant with bodies and magnitudes, and the passive qualities and motions of these. It is also conversant with such principles as pertain to an essence of this kind. For of things which have a natural subsistence, some are bodies and magnitudes, others have a body and magnitude, and others are the principles of those which have." So that's an interesting trichotomy. So we have, so of things that subsist by nature, some are bodies and magnitudes, others have body and magnitude. And then others are the principles of those which have body and magnitude. So let's see if Simplicius clarifies what those classes are. Footnote 1. The preface of Aristotle, says Simplicius, teaches us the intention and order of this treatise because it immediately follows the Physics. For as that discussed natural principles, it was necessary after it to speak of those things which consist from principles. But these are proximately bodies. And he syllogizes as follows. The science concerning nature is about things which have a natural subsistence. But things which have a natural subsistence are either bodies, as water, stones, and wood, or things which have bodies, as plants and animals, or they are the principles of things which have bodies, as matter, form, motion, and the like. Okay, so that's what he means by principles. Metaphysical principles, I guess you could call these natural principles. You don't need to use the term metaphysics. But yeah. So we get what those classes are. Soul also is the principle of things which have bodies, as of animals and plants. I was also wondering, does soul count as the principle of things which have bodies? So the things which have bodies, plants and animals, have a principle of themselves, which is soul, but also in general, in nature, matter is a principle, form is a principle, motion is a principle. Whether we would genuinely treat matter as a principle has to be investigated, but seems like Aristotle treats it as such. And in a certain regard, it can be treated as a principle, whether we have a kind of privational account of it or not, I think. But let's keep going. After the discussion, therefore, of natural principles, it is necessary to teach concerning bodies and things which have bodies, and it is evident that in these there are many bodies, and that the theory about these is manifold. For the things which have bodies and the principles of those which have them are known from bodies, and especially from such as are natural. Okay. Hence the science concerning nature is nearly, for the most part, conversant with bodies and the passive qualities of bodies, according to which they suffer and act. It is also conversant with the motions of them, for there are different species of motion, some according to place, others according to aliation or change in quality, and others according to increase and diminution. But generation and corruption are now called motions, and he appears to have proceeded from passions to motions as to that which is more universal. For passions are also certain motions, unless perhaps he calls energies motions, giving them a division opposite to passions. Okay, so there's two senses of motion. So you could call activity motion. This is the same as like motion versus rest. Well, in a certain regard, rest as a kind of passive motive potential can also be measured by time, but time is the measure of motion, and therefore rest is a certain motion. So that's motion sensu lato, and then sensu stricto will be motions as activities, and those can be opposed to passions, which are like the absence of that activity. But more broadly, sensu lato, passions are a certain kind of motion, in that broader sense of motion. Simplicius farther observes that Aristotle says nearly from philosophic caution, and that perhaps for the same reason he adds the word appears. But the words conversant with bodies and magnitudes are to be considered as having the same signification, unless they are intended to show that every body has magnitude, and that there are not, as some have asserted, indivisible or impartible bodies. Or he uses these words because the natural philosopher not only makes bodies the subject of his discussion, but also length and breadth, so far as they are the boundaries of bodies. Perhaps also because the natural philosopher discusses time and place, for these also possess magnitude, so far as they are continued and divisible, and yet they are not bodies. In short, if it is the business of a natural philosopher to speak of the continued, but not everything continued is a body, as Aristotle will shortly teach us, he very properly adds both, viz. Body and magnitude, because magnitude goes beyond body. Okay, that is continued, therefore, which is divisible into things perpetually divisible. But body is that which is every way divisible. So body is continuous. And of magnitude, indeed, that which is divisible in one way is a line, that which is divisible in two ways is a superficie, a plane, and that which is divisible in three ways is a body. And besides these, there is no other magnitude, because three are all, and thrice includes everything. For, as the Pythagoreans also say, the all and all things are bounded by three, since end, middle, and beginning contain the number of the all, and these contain the number of the triad. So this is interesting. I wonder if this is the case of like early Aristotle keeping his Platonic Pythagorean influences, because usually when he mentions the Pythagoreans, he's pretty hostile. He seems favorable here. But yeah, so he's saying there's division of magnitude in one, two, or three ways, and that amounts to lines, planes, and bodies, and that's it. Continuous magnitude goes up to that and no further. Because, and this is obviously like not a great explanation, but because three are all, and thrice includes everything. All and all things are bounded by three, since end, middle, beginning contain the number of the all, and these contain the number of the triad. So hence, assuming this number from nature, as if by a law of nature, we use it in the worship of the gods. That's interesting. So like pagan precedents for the Trinity, obviously we look to Proclus with his trinities or his triads at multiple levels of the hierarchy, and Plotinus with his three hypostases. The number three comes up in Plato, obviously, with the tripartite soul and various things. But here we have Aristotle testifying also to the idea that the number three had a special significance for pagans generally. Assuming this number three from nature, as if by a law of nature, we use it in the worship of the gods. After this manner also we assign appellations, for we call two things both, but not all. And we first give the appellation of all to three things. So if you're talking to two people, are you both going to the movie? If you're talking to three people, are you all going to the movie, I guess. We speak, however, in this manner because, as we have said, we follow nature in so doing. Okay? Hence, since all things, the all, and the perfect, do not differ in form from each other, so all things, the all, and the perfect are complete. Those are all kind of synonymous. But if they at all differ, it is in the matter. So formally, all things, the all, the perfect are the same, but in the substrate or what they're describing, they can differ. And in the things of which they are predicated, body will be the only perfect magnitude. For it is alone bounded by three things, and this is all. And since it is, he's doing a lot of like wordplay, which is unusual for Aristotle. And since it is triply divisible, it is every way divisible, because it exhausts all the possible divisions, because we can't go to higher than 3 dimensions. But of the other magnitudes, one is divisible in one way, and another in 2 ways. For as they partake of number, so likewise of division and continuity. Thus, one magnitude is continued according to 1 dimension, another according to 2 dimensions, and another is every way continued. Sure. And this footnote is kind of long. Footnote 2, Aristotle shows that body is every way divisible and every way continued and endued with interval because that which possesses a triple interval is also triply divisible, for 3 are all, and a threefold way is every way. But that body possesses a triple interval, has an interval every way. He shows from this that no magnitude has more than 3 intervals. Hence, that which has 3 intervals has an interval every way. This also is evinced by the property of the triad, for 3 are all, and 3 ways include every way. The Pythagoreans also briefly prove this as follows. Okay, interesting. So, like, when I'm debating about the Trinity with people, and I'm like, well, why the number 3? They could pull up this Aristotelian argument if they read Aristotle. The Pythagoreans also briefly prove this as follows. The all, in consequence of having a beginning, middle, and end, is defined by the number of the triad, and perhaps also is perfect on account of having a beginning, middle, and end. For that which is not all is in something deficient to the being all, and is imperfect. Okay. Perhaps also the all and the perfect are mutually convertible, but the perfect is said to be perfect because it has an end, and that which has an end has evidently a beginning and middle. But that 3 things are all and perfect, Aristotle shows from this number being employed by the sacred religion of antiquity. And after all, he persuades us to a belief of this, viz. That 3 are all, and that thrice includes everything from the use of names. But from what has been said, he again shows that body alone among magnitudes possesses interval every way, as was before observed, and is alone perfect, assuming that the all, the whole, and the perfect are the same, though they somewhat differ according to subject. Simplicius adds that it deserves to be noticed that Aristotle, contrary to his usual practice, employs in his demonstration Pythagoric persuasions. But here it may be doubted why that which has an interval in 3 ways has an interval every way, because 3 is a perfect number. For as a number, it is perfect, having a beginning, middle, and end, but why on this account is that which possesses a triple interval the all and perfect, since it may happen to be in want of other things? For no one who has 3 fingers will have all fingers because he has 3, nor because there are 3 elements here, as there now... Nor because there are 3 elements here, as there now all the elements. May we not say that as there are 3 intervals, that which has an interval in 3 ways has an interval in every way, because there is no other interval? Okay, so he's like, well, why is 3 perfect? And it comes down to they can't imagine beyond 3 dimensions, is basically it. Perhaps, therefore, Aristotle, in demonstrating that body possesses an interval every way from there not being any other interval, employs arguments from the number 3 according to probability. Simplicius farther adds that the admirable Ptolemy, in his treatise on interval, or dimensions, has well demonstrated that there are not more than 3 dimensions, because it is requisite that dimensions should be definite. But definite dimensions are assumed according to perpendicular right lines, and 3 right lines only can be assumed at right angles to each other. 2 indeed being those according to which the superficies is terminated, but the third being that which measures the depth. Hence, if there were any other interval after the 3rd dimension, it would be perfectly unmeasured and indefinite. Now, that's an interesting argument. So you can't put things orthogonally against body generally. Things will be at a right angle to a line or a plane. There's no other way to get a right angle out of that. It's either going to be according to some line or some plane. And so you'll never get beyond that 3rd direction for a right angle to occur in. Aristotle, therefore, appears to assume from induction that there is not a transition into another magnitude, But this Ptolemy demonstrates. So Ptolemy has a better proof. Simplicius likes that proof of why 3 is the all in the sense that Aristotle is saying here. I shall only observe farther that Ptolemy in his treatise De Alemate, by the word alema, the ancients signified a certain species and form of a celestial sphere, described in plane, viz. The common section of the meridian of other circles, together with the semicircles of parallels, from which the quantities of days and everything else pertaining to dialing may be easily obtained. Okay, so this is on this measurement of time, I guess, through the celestial sphere. But anyway, in his treatise, a Latin translation only of which by Commandine is extant. So this is obviously Taylor, not Simplicius. Printed at Venice by Aldus, shows that there are only 3 intervals by nearly the same arguments as those which, according to Simplicius, he employed in his book on dimension. Okay, so we don't have Ptolemy's treatise on dimensions, but we do have this Latin translation of this other book on celestial spheres, and he goes into dimensions there. So now Taylor will give us a quote from Ptolemy. His words are as follow: Quoniam igitur dimensiones quae in una quaque. I don't have to read all that. So translation: because therefore it is requisite that the dimensions which are in every bulk should be bounded in position and multitude, as also in magnitude, but of all the declinations, those which are made at right angles alone subsist after this manner. For all others are indefinite in species and infinite in number. So right angles stand out as being the only kind of definite, unique, and everything else is kind of an arbitrary measure of degree. The right angle is special. It's the only definite angle in a certain sense. This being the case, it follows that there are only 3 dimensions in every bulk, because 3 right lines alone can be constituted at right angles to each other, but there cannot be more. Okay. They're not imagining any abstract other spaces orthogonal to the 3-dimensional world or anything like that. Okay. We're a little bit over time now. We could start here. There's not going to be a good stopping place, so we'll pick back up here tomorrow, hopefully. How can I think last time I put like a line through to mark. Yeah, there we go. So that's where we'll start tomorrow. Any last thoughts on the reading today? Oh, I see Tom is in here for the first time. Welcome, Tom in the Jitsi. But okay, we will pick this back up tomorrow then.